Namaskar, hello and a very warm welcome viewers. You're watching Bills and Insight, your one-stop destination for views, news and analysis of proposed legislations of India that have far-reaching implications and impact your life. I'm your host Kriti Mishra, and today the spotlight is on the Assisted Reproductive Technology Regulation Act of 2021. President Ramnath Kovind has given his assent to this bill that was passed by Parliament during the last winter session. The law seeks to regulate and supervise assisted reproductive technology clinics and ART banks, prevent the misuse and ensure adoption of safe and ethical practices. And before the detailed analysis, let's take a look at the highlights of the Act. The Act proposes establishment of a national registry and registration authority for all ART clinics and medical professionals serving in the field. The Act proposes the constitution of a national board. The board will set minimum standards of physical infrastructure. The Act seeks stringent punishment for those practicing sex selection, sale of human embryos, found running agencies, rackets and organizations for such practices in violation of the law. So why was this law required? Well, assisted reproductive technology is used to treat infertility. It includes fertility treatments that handle both a woman's egg and a man's sperm. It works by removing eggs from a woman's body and mixing them with the sperm to make embryos. The embryos are then put back in the woman's body. IVF is the most common and effective type of ART. ART procedures sometimes use donor eggs, donor sperm, or previously frozen embryos. It may also involve a surrogate carrier. Many assisted reproductive technology clinics are running in the country without any regulation, and there was a need to regulate these, as there are implications on the health of those who undergo the procedure. While there are millions of infertile couples who are today either opting or planning to opt for the technology, and the sector is growing by leaps and bounds in the last few years, so the government felt the need to regulate these. We also need to understand the difference between Surrogacy Act and ART Act. The Surrogacy Act aims at regulating the practice of surrogacy, where infertile parents seek the help of a third woman who is also known as a surrogate mother. On the other hand, in ART technology, the infertile couple can become parents without necessarily taking help from a third person. And for deeper insights on this crucial act, I'm joined by an illustrious panel of guests. Joining us, Mrs. Vandana Chavan, member of the Upper House of Parliament from the NCP, Dr. Sarveen Sindhu, Director and Head IVF and Reproductive Medicine, Max Super Speciality Hospital, and Mrs. Namrata Agarwal, Additional District Judge and Additional Secretary, Delhi State Legal Services Authority. I welcome you all on Sansad TV and thank you so much for joining us. And before we commence our discussion, let's take a look at how our parliamentarians debated this bill.
आपके नजदीक वाले या घर वाले में किसी औरत का बच्चा नहीं होता तो कोई औरत मां नहीं बन पाती तो वो दुख क्या होता है। जो दंपति नेचुरल कंसीव नहीं कर पाते हैं वो अक्सर ART के मदद से फर्टिलिटी ट्रीटमेंट बहुत प्रचलित हो जाती है।
LGBTQ population, live-in couples, single men must also have access to this technology if they choose to be fathers.
Who are going to be members of the board, I would like to say that they have no knowledge about these equipments, they have no knowledge about the science, they have no knowledge how to do this. So if they don't themselves know and understand the procedure of the science, how are they going to catch hold of that erring clinic?
अनएथिकल प्रैक्टिस के लिए यहाँ कई सम्मानीय सदस्यों ने अपना विषय उठाया कि आप उसमें जेल की सज़ा नहीं होनी चाहिए। हम ऐसी कोई अनएथिकल प्रैक्टिस करें उसको तो बख्श नहीं सकते। हम ऐसा कोई कानून नहीं बना सकते जिसमें ऐसा फ्रॉड करके सभी के लिए डॉक्टर को इज्जत करते हैं हम। कोई हर डॉक्टर ये कर लेगा ऐसा नहीं है।
And Mr. Chavan, let me begin the program with you. The government had been working on this bill to regulate the ART industry since 2008 when it was first drafted by the Indian Council of Medical Research. The bill was first introduced in the Lok Sabha in 2020, but the House had referred it to the Standing Committee of Parliament. Then the Select Committee of Rajya Sabha on Surrogacy Bill said that ART bill must be passed first. The government accepted those recommendations. I know you've been closely associated with the legislative process of these two acts. Take us through the journey of the ART law.
in 1970, the world saw the first test tube baby in Louis Brown, and only a few months later, India, Calcutta-based doctor, also got the second test tube baby. And since then, the IVF technology and reproductive technologies has been mushrooming in India. People all over the world realize that there is expertise in our country, and therefore, naturally, there was a flow of several people from all across the world, and not only the world, even in our own country. Since the infertility rate has been increasing year by year, we saw a surge in the number of IVF clinics which came up. Yes, as you rightly said, that the first bill was presented way back in 2008. It was a long time that there was nothing happening, but in 2019, the surrogacy bill was tabled in the Lok Sabha, which was then referred to the Standing Committee on Health and Family Welfare. They came out with very good recommendations, but unfortunately, the Lok Sabha did not adopt those recommendations, and it was sent to the Raj Sabha. In Raj Sabha, again, a select committee was formed for the surrogacy bill. In all the recommendations in the surrogacy bill, one of the major recommendations was that before the surrogacy bill becomes an act, we have to make sure that the ART bill becomes an act. And therefore, in 2020, the ART bill was tabled in the Lok Sabha. That again was sent to the Standing Committee on Health and Family Welfare, where it was closely scrutinized, recommendations were made, and then it was passed in the Lok Sabha. Fortunately, the ART bill and the surrogacy bill together were passed in the Rajya Sabha, with all the recommendations made by the Select Committee, which were very, very proactive, very, very positive in that direction. I think this bill, the ART bill and the surrogacy bill together, have just shown the country that if there is a lot of debate, a lot of give and take, even a dialogue with several stakeholders, we can come out with good laws. And it has been a long journey indeed, but whatever we have come out with, I think gives a lot of teeth to the otherwise most required legislation, which was absolutely evident.
A very long journey, but I'm sure this legislation is going to be very effective. Mrs. Agarwal, coming to you now. India has emerged as one of the fastest growing centers for the ART service and attracts a lot of medical tourists from different countries around the world. More than 40,000 clinics use ART technology. Tell us, why was this regulation important?
A lot of clinics were mushrooming up in India. So what we needed was a centralized authority and a centralized body to register them and to regulate their practices. And this bill therefore was very important because now it has made registration of all these clinics as well as banks, the donor banks, very essential. And there are penal provisions attached with it because we know that as a country, we had to protect our male as well as female child. So it has made sex-selective techniques prohibitory under this act, and it has prescribed certain standard of conduct as well as certain conditions for every clinic if they want to run an IVF center. So they have prescribed certain standards which have to be maintained there. So I think it was very important, especially in a country like ours, where sex selection techniques are often used illegally and even otherwise, because a lot of clinics were mushrooming up. So registration and proper maintenance of data was very essential, and therefore this act has gone a long way in ensuring that.
All right, so very important points there. We'll just talk about the implementation of these rules. But Dr. Sindhu, coming to you now, help us understand the cost implications, because one of the concern is that the cost of the procedure should be effectively monitored so that even the poor of this country can avail these services.
As far as regulation of the cost is concerned, it's something which definitely is required, because there's some clinics which are charging the world. There are others who are charging less, but this is a super specialized branch. If you come into the lab, there is zero particulate count. We have filters all over and all those costs. So as a field, it is expensive, but yes, There are cheaper drugs, there are more expensive injections. It is up to the patient, because each drug has an advantage and a disadvantage. When you get the cost down, you also face the disadvantage of a cheaper drug. But definitely, I think the cost should come down for the poor people, because at the moment they cannot avail this facility, and it should be for everybody. So here I would say that one thing where the government can help is to give insurance, to be able to, at least for couples who have absolutely no child, to cover them in a medical insurance or something from the government, like what UK does in NHS. That is the best way of getting the cost down and letting everybody avail this facility.
All right, so that's a very progressive suggestion that you're giving, Dr. Sindhu. Mrs. Chauhan, do you agree with Dr. Sindhu?
I think so. The suggestion that Dr. Sindhu has given, I think it's absolutely right, because the lady has to go through several medical checkups and several tests and several procedures to be able to go through the entire gamut of, the reproductive technology procedures. And therefore, it's very important that I think this bill, this act, in fact, has ensured in Section 21 that a proper information is given to the commissioning parents, and the woman, of course, if she's single, not only just giving information, but counseling them, giving them total inputs as to what are the risks involved, what are the disadvantages, what are the advantages of going through a certain procedure. Now, these kind of checks and balances are very, very important. So with this kind of counseling, I think it becomes very important for the commissioning parents to decide whether they want to go through this entire procedure. And if the government is proactively wanting to really provide solace to the commissioning parents and the parenthood for these commissioning parents, I think that's a wonderful suggestion that Doctor has come out with. Why not? I mean, this could be taken care of. In fact, the surrogate mothers under the Surrogacy Act, which also becomes a subset of the ART Act, actually, there again, the commissioning mother or the surrogate mother has to be insured. So similarly, if that could be extended to a woman who is going to go through this entire gamut of becoming a mother through reproductive technologies, then why not? I mean, I think it's a wonderful suggestion.
This is a very, very progressive suggestion. But let's talk about another concern, Mrs. Chauhan, that was voiced when this bill was debated, that it allows a married heterosexual couple and a woman above the age of marriage to use ART and excludes single men, cohabiting heterosexual couples and LGBTQ individuals from accessing ARTs. What is your take on this?
There were a lot of parliamentarians who voiced this, that why not the transgender, especially in the light of the fact that the Supreme Court has been consistently giving decisions that they have a right to have parenthood. Why are they not included in this act? I think in a few days' time or a few years' time, we will surely see that being included in the bill. As far as the single men are concerned, the present adoption laws in our country also do not allow men to adopt children. A single male member cannot adopt a child. So I think same logic has been followed in this case too. Well, if you see from the child's perspective, I'm not really sure whether allowing a single man would be healthy in the long run. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a very difficult decision to be taken. So I think at this point of time, keeping the male member away is fine, but a single male member is fine. But as far as the LGBTQ community, I think it's very important that they need to be added in or given this liberty of going through the ART techniques to have parenthood.
All right, so let's hope as we move ahead, these provisions are also incorporated. But Mrs. Agarwal, apart from ensuring that the commissioning couple is eligible for availing the ART service, the clinics also need to provide counseling, make couples aware of the advantages, side effects, and other important factors. How do we ensure effective implementation of this law?
There are penal provisions attached with various things under Section 32 and 33 talks about penal provisions which are being attached. with various provisions if they are not complied with. So there is a constant check over the clinics, especially of the national board and the state board as well as the registries. So I think there are sufficient checks and balances in the Act which have been prescribed to ensure that the clinics do take care of all the possibilities and all the legal provisions which have been stated in the Act, especially the counseling part of it, because there is a very onus duty upon the clinics to make couples aware about the rights of the child as well and to counsel them, because the rights of the child also have to be taken care of. We have to understand, since we are bringing a new life into this world by the provision of this Act, so the rights of the child also become very important, his property rights, and the Act specifically says that the child would then be deemed to be the child of the commissioning couple only, and the donor will not have any right over the child, legally speaking. So that is very important, and I think various authorities have been constituted under the Act itself, which will take care that all the checks and balances that have been prescribed in the Act are taken care of, and plus the penal provisions which are stated in Section 32 and 33. I think they will take care of all the provisions which have been prescribed under the Act.
All right, but the Act also requires checking for genetic diseases before the embryo is implanted. Dr. Sindhu, how is the entire procedure performed?
I'm glad you brought this up, Kriti, because, you know, there are certain technical issues in the bill which I think along the way we'll be able to solve. But when we genetically test an embryo, it actually requires a huge cost to the patient. And after we test it, we are still not sure whether the embryo is normal, because there are certain false positives and false negatives. You could get an entirely normal report for an embryo which is abnormal. Of course, in less percentage, 5%, it's known as mosaicism, where the representation of cells is not even. So putting this in the Act, I think needs to have a little bit of debating and whether it should be there, because the cost of an embryo biopsy itself is very, very huge.
All right. So what's the way ahead, ma'am?
And I would also put in one word that, you know, when we get married, we don't genetically test our husband. Or we don't, if there is a family history of genetic problems, like there is a family history in the woman or in the man, yes, we must go in for genetic testing. But where we are just, finding an alternative to a natural conception, because natural conception is not occurring, to genetically test, I think is going too far ahead. Even for the couple, a lot of expense happens in that case.
Mrs. Chavan, you wanted to make a point. I could see that.
The doctor is the best person to be able to talk on this, but what I have seen as a layman, I'm told that whenever there are ART procedures, there's a possibility of multiple embryos and therefore, twins or triplets being born.
Yes.
So obviously the pregnancy is not the normal pregnancy, as we call it. Not that twins and triplets don't happen to, natural pregnancies also, but the ratio of these kind of births is much more. And therefore, if we can avoid these kind of pregnancies, or even we see in fact, some of us MPs are working on rare diseases amongst children. And these rare diseases are such that, they're so expensive. Each injection costs a few lakhs and sometimes even 1 crore. So if this kind of irregularity could be traced pre-implantation, or say once the child is in the womb and, could be addressed, I think that's, why not? I mean, why should? But then as the doctor said, it's very expensive. I think at such times the government should kind of subsidize these kind of services to make sure that the parents do not have to go through after the births through. It is quite a painstaking kind of life, not only for the parents but even for the child himself or herself.
Those are again very progressive suggestions that our panelists are giving. But time for closing comments from all our panelists. Mrs. Agarwal, coming to you first. So the Surrogacy Act and the ART Act paving the way for ensuring reproductive rights of the women. Your thoughts, ma'am?
I think it is a very well and a very thought after step taken by the government at last. We needed these laws to regulate surrogacy and ART in our country, and it's a very positive step which will go a long way in changing the lives of many families, many couples who otherwise could not take advantage of these, medical facilities that are being offered in different parts of the country. Plus, it goes a long way in protecting the rights of not only the couples, but also the donors, as well as the child who will be brought into the life. So it takes care of all the three and regulate the banks as well as the clinics, who are basically the main functionaries in the entire process. So I think it is a very positive and a very welcoming act which has been brought into light, and it will now make the entire process much more easier and convenient for the couples.
Dr. Sindhu, progressive and welcoming act?
Much needed in our field, especially where we are having these mushrooming of clinics. They don't have a proper infrastructure. They don't have well-trained staff. In fact, there's no trained staff and they are doing IVF. Very much needed. My only suggestion is that in all this, keep a technical person on board, because there are a lot of technical things which need to be tackled. Even when you have a complaint, you need a technical person there. I think the surrogacy bill does not have an IVF specialist on board in that committee which has been named. An obstetrician and gynecologist cannot comment on IVF because they've never done it.
Yes.
So must have IVF people there so that a proper decision can be taken on a lot of things.
I hope Mrs. Chavan is taking note of that.
We have already voiced this in the parliament, in fact. This has been voiced by several parliamentarians when we were debating on this issue. Of course, in the Rajya Sabha, the opposition had walked out, so there was no issue of saying this. But yes, everybody, even from the Treasury benches, some of the MPs have voiced this.
All right, so with this law, nearly 27.5 million infertile couples will be sure of the ethical practices in ART clinics and banks. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Mrs. Chavan, Dr. Sindhu and Mrs. Agarwal. Next week, we'll return with incisive analysis of another important bill or act. Till then, take care, stay tuned to Sunset TV. Namaskar.